we're trying to create like a shared brain, essentially, that we want to capture all that institutional knowledge. We want to make sure that as the people come in and out of the practice, as different people get assigned to different areas, that all that information stays with the firm and that the new people or the people coming into the position can access it all and just basically pick it up and run from where the last person left off. That's one thing that I think makes practice management software so helpful.
You're listening to the Legal Mastermind Podcast with your hosts Ryan Klein and Chase Williams, the go-to podcast for learning from the experts in the legal community about effective ways to grow and manage your law firm.
Today on the Legal Mastermind Podcast, we have Melanie Leonard. She's the founder of streamlined.legal. And recently, Melanie opened streamlined.legal. She was practicing real estate law for quite some time. So we're excited. I'm here with my co-host today, Ryan Klein. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing quite well. Excited for this one.
We're going to dive in to exactly everything Melanie does to help lawyers implement software.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So starting off, really, I think that the first question to ask is, what do you do exactly?
Sure. So I help attorneys get the most out of their practice management and other software that they're using within their law firms. So what I find a lot of times is people will buy software, especially for law firms, and, they'll put it in and they'll use like a small portion of it, maybe the billing or portion of it or whatever. And then there's just so much more that the software can do that they just never venture into. And so we like to guide them through that and help train them and implement it for them.
So what are the common softwares that people are implementing?
We work a lot with practice management software and in particular, but specifically we do a lot of work with Clio. And so I'd say that's probably what most of our clients are using right now.
I think we've always been interested in going to that Clio Cloud conference.
It is an awesome conference. And frankly, even if you're not a Clio user, they have so many different tracks. They have like 3 or 4 different tracks. And so if you're not even thinking about, how to use Clio, there's a whole other track about, just growing your business and marketing and the future of law and that kind of stuff. So it's a real fun conference, even if you're not a Clio user.
Let's start with Clio. And I'm not an expert when it comes to all the different software options that are out there nowadays. I used to be more aware of it when I worked in-house. And now that, we're focusing more on the marketing side, we're not always aware of what's out there and what's trending. From my experience, I know when I was consulting for law firms and I'd go in-house and I'd not only propose different approaches or opportunities for marketing and growing business, but also for organizing what was going internally. And I would present options such as Clio to a law firm. And I'd say, hey, I looked this up. It's going to help streamline this. It's going to replace this. It's going to make your lives so much easier because A, B, and C. And the lawyers would be in the room and they say, that's amazing. That sounds incredible. Let's get started. And then it's like, oh, I can't really do it personally because I'm not, a professional. I'm not certified and kind of starting that up. So
sure. Do
lawyers that know they want to make a change or transition to software, do they normally hire like someone certified or do they go to their IT person? How do you see them typically getting started?
That's a great question. I think it really depends on the law firm, of course. I mean, I am an attorney, so I'll need the it depends answer. But I'd say if you're looking at a firm if you're talking about like a solo or small firm where there's a handful of people, they will likely try to just implement it on their own. They'll sign up, they'll sign in, log in online, and just start using whatever they can. Or a lot of times those softwares will have, video help or articles on how to help you use the software. So a lot of times with a smaller firm, they'll start there. Now, at a certain point, they may get to a point where they feel like we could really use some help because maybe this is a little more than we anticipated taking on, or maybe we were looking to accomplish a particular goal that we can't figure out. So then they might move on to trying to find some help in the form of, someone who's certified or at least experienced in the software. But if you're talking about a larger firm or a mid-sized to large firm, then you're more likely going to have attorneys that are going to be looking for help right from the get-go or from the beginning, which is really smart because not only just for the software's sake, but when you're dealing with that many people, it just makes everything that much more complex. You have more people, it's going to take more time. Everything you're trying to do is going to go just a little bit slower. So yeah, I would say it depends on the size of the firm and also what their goals are. I mean, as far as Are they trying to just use it for billing, or do they want to just like fully immerse themselves in it? What's their end game? What's the purpose of them purchasing the software? So those are some of the factors that I'd say you probably would look at when you're trying to determine what kind of response you're going to get.
So beyond billing, what are some other features that you would say are like the low-hanging fruit?
Oh, the low-hanging fruit, I would say are things like the calendar and the contact management, as far as putting people's contact information in there and having a central place to find it. But as far as the things that I think are most helpful or will give you the highest return on investment, there I really think you're looking at things like the task feature or the workflow feature, depending on what software you're looking at. Anything that can help you take a look at where a case is in the process. If you're looking at litigation, what stage of the case are we in? If we're looking at, some type of estate planning, where are we in the process of creating those documents? Anything that can help you track that, and then who's supposed to be working on what when. That's a feature that I think is very underutilized and very powerful in this type of software.
So far, we've only mentioned Clio. They're definitely going to be enlightening me and then also some of our listeners. Besides Clio, what are some other options, and maybe why would a law firm opt for one over another? And is it because it's like practice area specific sometimes? And
yeah, so there's a whole trend of practice management software moving towards moving to the cloud. And that's been going on for quite some time. So I'd say there's a lot of options that are not practice area specific. So for example, Clio, it doesn't depend, it doesn't matter the practice area. It can handle a lot of different practice areas. Practice Panther is another one. My Case, Rocket Matter, there's a whole slew of them. And frankly, the legal tech industry has just had an infusion of money over the last number of years, probably over the last decade even, where it's just like more and more money's coming in and more people are coming up with software. And so it's a real hot space right now. So I feel like, some of the things that are here right now won't be around in another couple of years. And that happens today, all the time. Just this past year, 2 of my favorite software just left. They don't even exist anymore. So that can happen. Clio, on the other hand, has been around for 10 plus years. Practice Panther's been around a long time. My Case even longer. So those are some of the more general software. Then you've got things that are practice area specific. A lot of software is popping up in the area of personal injury, like CasePeer and FileVine are some of the popular ones there. But then you've also got other areas like bankruptcy has their own software, and immigration has a lot of their own software. And so if you are a firm that's dedicated to just one practice area, then I think those are definitely worth looking into. However, if you have a firm with a number of different practice areas, then you may be better off picking one that can handle all of them, as opposed to, having a bunch of different software per practice area. The whole idea behind practice management software, at least in my mind, is that we're trying to create like a shared brain, essentially. And that's a little creepy sounding, but maybe more professionally to say that we want to capture all that institutional knowledge. We want to make sure that as the people come in and out of the practice, as different people get assigned to different areas, that all that information stays with the firm, and that the new people or the people coming into the position can access it all and just basically pick it up and run from where the last person left off. And so that's one thing that I think makes practice management software so helpful. If you have a firm using a bunch of different software, sometimes that can become more and more disjointed and less helpful.
When we spoke before in the pre-interview, you mentioned that practice management software can take a firm from a defensive stance to an offensive stance. Do you want to elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, and this, the way I first discovered this was just by my own personal experience. And then, of course, the more firms that I've worked with over the years, the more I see it happening there as well. But basically, if you've ever practiced in a firm where you're feeling like you're always putting out a fire, or you're always responding to the latest email, or you're always responding to the latest phone call, that can be exhausting. And it's not necessarily the best way to represent your client either. So I really feel like practice management software, and in particular that task or workflow function, can do so much towards putting us on a more offensive position as opposed to defensive. So, with the practice management software and the workflows and task lists, now we can better anticipate what needs to be done in a case. And we're not always reacting to the next court date or reacting to the phone call we just got. We have a very succinct roadmap, essentially, that we can follow in order to make sure that everything's getting done on a case ahead of when someone starts complaining. And so I think that basically changed the way I practice law. I mean, it opened up so many opportunities for me now, because now I was on the offensive and I was setting the pace, as opposed to letting that be set for me based on either my client's needs or my, the court or anything else. So it really, in my mind, gives you a lot more flexibility and a lot more peace of mind to be able to practice that way.
We've established a pretty clear overview of how software can definitely help a firm if they haven't really engaged in getting or implementing it for their law firm yet. And we've also established that there are a lot of options out there. Mm-hmm. And for example, for our software needs, in the case of review generation, in the past, we used Bird Eye, we used 5 Stars, and then we end up using GatherUp. And what I'm getting at is they all do pretty much the same thing, but we settled on one because of their customer service and their leadership and their vision for their product. So do you think that is also a big factor when deciding practice management software? If they all kind of do the same thing, do you start to look a little bit beyond and see those other, I guess, maybe intangibles when it comes to selecting a software partner?
Yeah, absolutely. And the example I brought up earlier, there were 2 different software. One was called Tally, and it would help you track your time by voice. So you could speak to your phone or your Alexa device and give it a time entry, and it would integrate with your practice management software. And then another one was called Allocate, where it would basically watch what you were doing on your computer and track the time you spent on different documents or different web pages or whatever, so that you could very easily create time entries out of that into your practice management software. Both of those I thought were fantastic products that literally just are not there anymore. So I definitely think that taking a look at the history of the software as far as how long it's been around, taking a look at what they're doing as plans for the future are very important things to take a look at, because here's the thing. It doesn't matter what software you're coming from or going to. Switching software is never fun. And so I think that being able to find one that, and you'll never know for sure, of course, but being able to take a look at what are their plans for the future, what's going on here, what is their history, that's definitely something that's going to put you on the right track. And then, of course, are they always constantly adding new features? Are they kind of flatlined here? Are they looking at other products and they're not as interested in this one anymore? Those are all things that I would take a look at if I was deciding on a partner, because you're right. A lot of practice management software, they have a lot of the basic same features. They all have calendars, they all have task management, they all have contact information. So definitely looking at the history and the future is something I take a look at, and that customer service you were talking about. If I can go on to my software and just start chatting with a representative and get my answer in about 2 minutes, well, that's going to save me a lot of time and energy in the future, as opposed to having to wait for a response or having to spend time on hold or something like that. So yeah, customer service, exactly. I'll add to that though too. One thing that you didn't mention that we kind of alluded to is integrations. There's a lot of practice management software that integrates with other software. And I think that can be so appealing, because the reality is you're never going to find the perfect practice management software. I mean, it just doesn't exist. And so if there's an opportunity for you to solve a pain point within your office by adding an integration, as opposed to having to switch the whole software, then it seems to me like that would be a really great solution. So yeah, I would look at that in addition to all the other features, all the other factors, is how many other software and what kind of other software they integrate with.
Yeah, when it comes to software, I definitely believe it should always be evolving. The people running it and developing it should always be getting feedback and trying to make it better. I can't imagine working with the software, implementing it for a whole entire law firm and really leaning on that to take my firm to the next level, and then knowing that the functionality is going to be stagnant indefinitely. Like the idea of that.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, though, that's the way software worked for many years. I mean, there were years and years of people buying software, and that's what you got. And maybe they would update it every year or, however often. But now we live in a world where we expect our software to be constantly changing and constantly improving. But not everyone is used to that or expects that still. So I agree with you. That's what I would want in a software, but not everybody looks at it that way. That's for sure.
And then next for that, to tie in Clio from the beginning, as far as the conferencing, it's really interesting to see how software, not just in legal and other places like Salesforce and HubSpot, they transcend just the software and create a whole community and like a whole, almost like a status of adopting their software. And so how do you also feel about that when there's almost this byproduct that's a community because of the software, where people also get together and become not only raving fans, that's almost like a given at that point, but they're also getting together and saying, hey, have you ever integrated this software to do X, Y, and Z? And then someone else is, oh, I didn't know that you could do that. And it takes the product to almost another level. And I think that that's probably a really important factor.
I think it's fantastic. Unfortunately, I don't think there's as many of those software out there, but when you do find them, absolutely. I mean, it basically just gives you a whole nother layer of support than just the company, right? I mean, if Clio, their technical support goes 24/5. So on the weekend when I'm, trying to get something accomplished and they're not there to answer me right away, I'm hopping on Facebook and I'm going into their user group and I'm going to, bring up my question, and I'll likely get it answered by some other user before Clio even opens the next Monday. So yeah, I think even if you're not taking advantage of those conferences or other things that may come of that, I think that it just gives you that whole other layer of support and opportunity to interact with people and get those ideas that you might not have otherwise come up with on your own.
It's really important that lawyers implement some sort of software.
I think personally that we're getting to an age and a time where if you're not using practice management software, it's bordering on malpractice, because there's so many things that the software can do that if you're not catching it manually, then is it reasonable to say, well, you should have, what's reasonable? Well, you should have purchase the software and use that for your conflict checking or for your, calendaring, because it's a reasonable price, it's very easily accessible, and you didn't use it. And now you had this mistake. So we may not be there quite yet, but I think we're on the verge of a point where, it's reasonable to say that if you're not using the software with these features that is readily available, then that would be malpractice. So I think that when you are looking to implement a practice management software, again, it's going to depend on the size of the firm. But if I'm a smaller, solo or smaller practitioner, then I may just want to go out and try something on my own and just play around with it and see how it works. Because the reality is you're the one that has to work with it, or your small staff. And so, pick something that you guys feel comfortable with and you like. I always say the best practice management software is the one you're going to use. So if there's one out there that you're thinking, oh, I just don't like it for whatever reason, well, don't get that one. There's plenty of other choices. So definitely pick something that you like. If you're at that point where you've made a decision or you've purchased it and now you're just not quite sure where to go from there, at Streamlined Legal, we take pride in the idea that, we're not just training, we're also helping you design and come up with how you're going to use the software, because I find a lot of these companies are really good at tech support as far as if you want to make a new calendar appointment, click here and click there. That they're really good at. They're not so good at telling you, well, maybe you should have a separate calendar for your conference room, or maybe you should have a separate calendar for each practice area. So that whole design part that goes behind it isn't necessarily something that you're going to get from the software company themselves. And so I think that being able to find someone to help you with that is going to make your use of that software that much more efficient and powerful.
And we've had podcasts in the past where the focus certainly wasn't software, but our guests have definitely mentioned, when they implemented certain kinds of software that did tracking or helped streamline, certain aspects of the law firm, they increased their billable hours by a lot. So I'm
sure. Absolutely.
Certainly a huge positive. If anyone's wondering about bottom line, comes to these kinds of conversations.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you that it's funny when I start asking questions and learning more about a firm and how they get stuff done, the software is really more of a symptom in my mind, where the underlying cause of how they're doing things and what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing, it really comes down to procedures and, what are their staff doing and how does that interact with software and how does it intersect with software? But the reality is there has to be a basis. So for example, if I'm going to buy Clio to help me with my billing, that's great. But how are we currently doing billing? Like, is it handled by one person or two people? Or when do we bill and how often do we bill? And that's all stuff that the software doesn't necessarily help you with. It can help you track it, but it doesn't necessarily help you make those decisions. And so I think that anytime you're implementing a new software, kind of taking a step back and breaking down, what are the goals that we're trying to achieve with this software and what are the procedures and things that we're going to do in order to use the software or to make the software work the best. I think those are things that I would definitely want to think through before I purchased any software in order to get the thing that's going to help me the most.
This is one of the few things, like we talk about all the time, resistance to lawyers. Like, we get it. Lawyers don't want to change things all the time. But this is one situation where like a lot more of the team might be resistant to change, from like legal assistants, paralegals, anyone in the support has to also participate in this transition.
When you're talking about implementing a new software, and particularly practice management software, it really is much more effective if you have, or when you have, the whole team on board. And I'm talking about everyone from the attorneys to the support staff to the billing people. If not everybody is using it, it's just not going to be as effective. And so there is a certain amount of buy-in that you have to have from the team in order to make it work as well as it can. And so a lot of times I will encourage people before they start any type of implementation to go to the staff and to go to their attorneys and have the discussion of, hey, we're looking to solve these problems or to get something to help us with this. What are your thoughts? Because even if you don't choose the solution that they suggest or that they want or solve all the problems that they have, just by merely including them in that conversation, that's going to help you get their buy-in and help them be a little bit more on board with what you end up doing. Again, even if it's not what they suggested.
What made you stop being a lawyer and transition into this new role?
Oh, absolutely. So I had my practice for about 12, 13 years. And the last 2 years of it, I joined a coaching program called How to Manage a Small Law Firm with the idea that I wanted to grow my business. And my gross income had flatlined for a while. And so I figured, I need to try something different. So I joined that coaching group. I learned a lot about running a business. I learned a lot of the things that I had done well and a lot of things that I hadn't done well. And just through that process came to realize that I really much prefer helping other attorneys organize and, run their practices as opposed to running my own. And I had kind of been a bit burnt out from having done my practice for as long as I had. And so I decided instead to open up this business. And it's really been awesome because, number one, I enjoy it a lot more. But number two, it's really given me the opportunity to help even more people, because with each attorney that I'm helping, they're in turn able to, represent their clients even better and maybe even more clients. And so the trickle-down effect, I think, has been fantastic. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it and it's been a much better fit for me.
So Melanie, if people want to reach out for your help or guidance, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Absolutely. I'd be thrilled to have them come visit our website. It's www.streamlined.legal. And that's streamlined with an ED at the end. And there you can find our contact information and hear about some of the stuff that we're doing. And we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks for listening to the Legal Mastermind podcast. If you're interested in working with Ryan and Chase, please email mastermind@marketmymarket.com. Make sure to join the free mastermind group for growing and managing your firm at lawfirmmastermind.com. Ryan Klein and Chase Williams are the managing partners at Market My Market, one of the top legal marketing companies in the United States.